Okay, we're returning books to the library, but before I turn these two in, I wanted to tell you and show you what we read. These are the first two books of October. The first one is Her Radiant Curse. This is by Elizabeth Lim. Can you see it? Am I too close? So I did earlier this year, I read The Dragon's Promise and what was the other book? So 6 Crimson Cranes and then The Dragon's Promise. And those are the first two books. And this is kind of the prequel to that. This talks about the stepmother in six Crimson Cranes. And I was going to say 6 Crimson Dragons. I was trying to blend both books together. But it talks about the stepmother and her past and kind of how it all came to be. So it really was interesting when I picked this up. I was like, wow, this kind of sounds familiar. I read those books, the other books, like in January, February, I believe. This book was another, I think it was just good in the series. It really ties it up. It gives you more of a sense of understanding where she came from, who she is. I do still think that you'd want to read, if you want to read it in a particular order, I would definitely read 6 Crimson Cranes first and then come back to do this, because you do learn about the stepmother. I think it's more interesting to go in and just kind of not knowing her full story and read that first, and then maybe come back and read this. And then who knows, if you want to reread it with fresh eyes, you could do that too. The other book I just finished up was The Long Game by Elena Armas. I'm not sure, but picked this one up and read it. I will let you know there is some spice factor to this read, so be warned. It's kind of a slow burn into like the last third of the book maybe, but I was able to skip over most of the spice. This book follows Adeline Reyes, and she is follows Adeline, and she is the daughter of a big soccer team. I wanted to say something else, but she's the daughter of the CEO, the owner of a soccer team, and she has high aspirations of living up to her father's legacy and one day taking over the team. But something happens and she ends up attacking physically the team's mascot, and a video of that goes viral and it sends her world spinning. In this book we find out, sorry, just showing you the back there. In this book we find out what happened to kind of make her snap. And of course, we have a love interest. In the book, she has to be sent away. Her father sends her away because she says, essentially, she's like a PR nightmare at this point. And he sends her away to this little remote town. Of course, we bump into our love interest, and we go from there. We find out who he is and why he's in this kind of nowhere town. There is a little twist at the end that I kind of had a sneaky suspicion about it, but I'll leave that be about the family. And yeah, all in all, I thought it was a fun, light read. Like I said, there is some spice in here, so be warned if that's not something that you enjoy reading. So I'm gonna drop these 2 books off and then get back to reading for this month. Okay, really quickly, let me sum up 2 more books that I finished this month. The first is City of Villains by Estelle Laure, I think, or Laurie. And then the sequel to it, City of Hooks and Scars. So I read this book first. My oldest son read this one, and it was kind of like, I think it's even described that way, but it's a Disney reimagined book. This is, I don't know, I wouldn't really call it oh gosh, what's the word? I'm completely blanking on the correct term, but like a fairy tale retelling, I think that's what I want to say. I wouldn't call it that because it doesn't follow any one particular fairy tale, but it does allude to some of the people in this book being some of our traditional Disney villains that we know. So this book follows young Mary Elizabeth Hart, and she is a high school senior interning at their local police station. They live in a world where there used to be magic, but something happened and the magic was just gone. And so in this book, we kind of follow along Mary Elizabeth, and she starts to uncover some secrets. Things start happening to her friends. There are those that were, I guess, descendants of magic, and they are called Legacy and born with a heart-shaped birthmark on their wrist. And then those kids are called Legacy kids, or some of them are adults now, so Legacy, and those are the people that were of magic or of magic families. So we follow that along, and we kind of are trying to figure out what happened to magic, what's going on. As the book goes on, some kids start to disappear, and then we follow that trail. The end of it, it does kind of leave off on a little bit of a cliffhanger, and so I did pick up the next book because once I dig into a series, I kind of want to finish it through and follow it and figure out what the rest of the story was. I will say that City of Villains, it was okay. It was enjoyable, but it was slow to start. I struggled to keep my attention with this book. And I rated it a 3-star, which isn't really a bad rating. It was just okay. It wasn't something that I think I would have continued on with if it didn't have that cliffhanger. If I felt like I could just put it down, I could. But also, because we already had the second book here, we checked both of these out from the library. Because we had the second book here, I went ahead and picked it up. And on Storygraph, this book was rated higher than the first one. So I read this one too, just hoping that it would get a little bit better. This one has a little more excitement, a little more action happening in it. We kind of see some changes happening in Mary Elizabeth. This one also, I feel like, leaves you off on a cliffhanger, a little bit of a cliffhanger, leaving it open for more books. I'm not sure if there are more books or if she's writing more books, but it leaves it open for that. And this one was a little bit more captivating, I guess would be the word, than the first book. And I understand. In this book, we're still building the world, which is kind of learning. And this one, we know most of the characters, and we're just kind of peeling off more layers and trying to figure out what's going on. In this book, we're still following Mary Elizabeth, and she is in a different part of her life now. Things have changed for her. She has sort of lost some friends and is just really questioning what is happening in her world. And we're trying to uncover more secrets of what is happening. People that she thought she trusted, people that she thought were maybe quote unquote good, turned out not to be, and people that she thought were quote unquote bad turned out quite not to be either. So this one, I don't know, I think I might have rated this one 3.5. But yeah, so I finished these 2 books up, and then right now I just checked out an Amish read from the library because I had purchased this book, and it is the second in a series. So I picked this one up to read it just to give myself a little bit of an escape. But because it was the second in a series, I checked my library and the online ebooks to see if the first book was available, and it is. So I'm reading that up now, and then hopefully we'll get to this one too. Okay, 2 more books that I wanted to wrap up really quickly. Sorry, I'm very distracted. I read Hearts in Harmony by Beth Wiseman. This is part of the Amish Journey, the first book. This first book follows Levi Shetler and then also Mary Hirschberger. And then there's also 2 other main characters, an older woman, Adeline, and then a niece that comes into the picture later in the book. This was just a really kind of found family story. It was a little bit difficult in the sense that it does deal with the older woman getting older and dealing with some with issues of mental things that happen as you get older sometimes, so Alzheimer's and things that happen, and what we find out really is happening with her. It also, of course, has to deal with death because Adeline is a widow. Her late husband is talked about throughout the book, so I don't know if that's a trigger, then that's, some warnings for that. But also, the Amish in this book, they don't allow music or playing music. And so Levi in particular is a musical prodigy. So he's able to play the piano without ever having had lessons because music isn't allowed in their culture. And so he can play the piano, and Mary loves to sing. She has found some Christian music that she has heard, and she really enjoys it. So part of the book goes through that, where they are just trying to unravel and decide what's going to be best for them. But this book, I'm glad that I read it so that I can move on to the next one. The next book discusses another character in the story. I believe that it's going to talk about another member of Levi's family, and then the niece that is mentioned. I don't know if I remember her name off the top of my head. I don't. But the niece that is mentioned later in the book, it goes into her story. And then there is a third book after that that talks about characters that were introduced in the first part, in the first story too. And I'm assuming they're going to be in the second story as well. So that was that book. And then another book that I finished up was Loving My Actual Life, an experiment in relishing what's right in front of me by Alexandra Kuykendall. I'm not sure if I said that right, but this book, I actually was going to DNF it. And when I picked it up to return it to the library, I read it as a digital read. I just started like skimming through it, making sure I wanted to DNF it, and then I finished it. So I didn't have that much more to go through or to finish it up. But this is kind of interesting. It follows a woman who goes on this 9-month journey. She just feels like 9 months is a good number to have a journey, and she starts every month putting a new challenge in front of her. Each chapter is a different challenge. One is being more adventurous. One, I think, is about making the Sabbath day a rest day, and just different things that she wants to do. There's like a meal planning one, I believe. There's one of actually taking care of herself, like maybe self-care type thing. I can't remember exactly the wordage that she uses for each one, but all in all, it was pretty interesting. The only reason I was going to DNF it is because I was reading other books at the same time, and I think that I just wasn't getting to it fast enough for me. I just felt like I had too many books that I was reading at the same time, and I needed to put some down, but I ended up finishing it anyways. And I would say it was an interesting read. It was fun. It was neat to look at. It was really inspiring for me in the way of seeing that you just break down your goals into bite-sized pieces and what you can accomplish. And I did skim over some of it because it's written kind of like diary entries, where the beginning of the chapter is what her goal is, how she kind of comes about it, and then, you know, day one, day so on and so on and so on. And so that was pretty interesting to read as well. Right now, I do have too many books that I'm currently reading at the same time. I don't know if you can hear my older son, but he's cracking himself up there. So I got to get back to mom duties, but I have too many books open is what I was saying on my to be read. I'm trying to condense it down, but I don't know. Let's see what we get done with the rest of this month. Okay, so we're done. October is over. We're not done. I hope we're not done. I hope you come back. But for the month of October, reading is done. At the time of recording, it's just a few days after October, and this month I ended up reading a total of 9 books. That's all. I felt like in the winter I was going to read more, but things have not slowed down yet. So I don't know. 9 is, I'd say it's still a reasonable amount, but it just, versus the summer, I was in the double digits. So anyways, the last couple of books that I read were Dear Henry, Love Edith by Becca Kinzer. This was a really sweet read. I liked this one. I give it 4 stars. This book follows Henry and Edith needs a place to stay, her original place that she's going to stay in this very small town. There's mold and a leak and something has happened, so she can't stay there. So the person who was going to host her at her home is out of town and says, you know, my uncle lives in the same town. He's a sweetheart. You can stay in his upstairs because he's injured and has to stay on the bottom floor. I'm sure he won't mind at all. His name is Henry, and Edith thinks that it's just going to be this endearing older gentleman who lives there, and so she agrees. Meanwhile, Henry, who is not older, thinks that with a name like Edith, Edith must be older, and agrees to what he thinks is an elder widow let stay in his upstairs of his home while he is nursing his injury and trying to get better downstairs. And so Edith and Henry end up essentially living together, but neither of them have really met each other. It's kind of a blind date thing. And so they end up leaving notes to each other on the kitchen island. And so you get to read their notes. Is that oh no, I can't think of the word. I'm sure you can. What's the word? Let me know. Where you get like the notes back and forth, where they get writing. Oh man, it's gonna drive me bonkers. But part of the story is written in that form, and just all that ensues because neither one are what the other one thinks. They both think that they're writing to these older people, and they're not. They're super similar in age, and so we get to follow in this very small town what ends up happening with the two of them. Of course, there's a misunderstanding, and just fun. It's just a good book. So I really enjoyed this book. The next book that I finished was The Brothers Hawthorne. This is the 4th Inheritance Game book. This book took me for a ride. In all honesty, when I finished the Inheritance Game, the first 3 books, I finished books 2 and 3 just because I kind of wanted to know more of the story. I would say the first 3 books, the first book is my favorite. 2 and 3, like I said, I kind of wanted to keep knowing what mysteries there were. And also, if you have been around and know my reading, it is hard for me to walk away from a series. I have done it, but it's tough for me. So I wanted to finish the series, and then lo and behold, this 4th book came out, and I thought, okay, well, if there's only one more book, I'll finish it. But there's not. There's a 5th book coming, but that's okay because the fourth book was so good. I don't want to hype it up too much for you and then like have you read it and be like, meh. So I did give this one, I waited to rate it because I wanted to see if it was like a 4 or even a 5 star. And I settled somewhere in the middle with 4.5 stars. In this book, we follow more of the brothers and we learn a little bit more about Jameson. And at some point, I'm going to be completely honest, Jameson was on my every last nerve. I was like, oh, child, just listen. But it only happened up until a certain point, and then like within 2 chapters, I was Team Jameson again. And so it was just endearing, and seeing more of him and Avery together and how they've really bonded and created this bond. And then we also are going back and forth between the view of Grayson, and he is going and discovering more things about his family and these sisters that he has. So I don't want to give too much away, but I will say that this was a good book. This was right up there with that first one in the first 3. And then, like I said, I thought I was going to be done and it was going to be complete, but at the back of the book, it shows there's another one coming out. So I'll probably have to pick that up too when it does come out. And then lastly, I listened to We Were Dreamers, an immigrant superhero origin story by Simu Liu. And I really enjoyed this book. I listened to it because it was narrated by him. And it was, I did rate it. I was going to say, I don't think I rated it, but I did. I rated it 4 stars. It not only tells his story, but he dives into the story of his parents who were immigrants here, and then just kind of tells more of his upbringing. The book takes you from his upbringing up to the point of his role in 10 Rings. Or I think the full title of that movie is Shang-Chi and the Legend of the 10 Rings. So it takes you right up to there. So if you're looking for background information on that movie, this book's not going to give that to you. It's just going to take you right to the beginning of that journey. You do get to hear his reaction to getting the news that he's got the part, but it doesn't continue on from there. But like I said, it is, I found it was endearing. I think it was even more endearing to hear it from his voice and hear his inflection as he read. And then there are parts that you can tell are super difficult for him to read and to share. I mean, he is an actor too, but I feel like it was just his personal story. So we were getting his honest feelings there, but he, like I mentioned, he talks about his parents' story and then him coming to America and being with his parents and how all that happened, his high school years, his college years, and then I don't think I realized how old he was until he finally got this big break. I just remembered him actually from Convenience. If you know that show, let me know. My husband and I loved it. We watched it, and we just thought it was hilarious, and we had a ball watching it. And so that's when 10 Rings came out. I was super excited to see him again, but I didn't really know much about him until the book. There are parts in the book, though, I will let you know, that get a little bit maybe political. So just I don't know if that's considered a trigger or anything, but it's his story and his opinions, and all in all, I think he did a really great job with it, and I enjoyed that book as well. That is all that I read for October. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. I am in the middle of still a few books, still trying to finish Atomic Habits. Come back and see it in the November wrap up if I finally finish that book, because that is the goal, to get that book done by Thanksgiving. We'll see. But thanks so much for hanging out with me and just kind of wrapping up books. Let me know what you read, what you loved, what you didn't. If you've read any of the books that I mentioned and what you thought of them. And as always, if you don't know or you just need to be reminded, may be the one to tell you that you are deeply and truly loved and so, so appreciated. I really appreciate you taking your time out and spending it here with me. Thanks for watching.